She came at the wall of red the way a swimmer comes at a buoy after the current has already taken her, straight, desperate, with the last of what she had. I was standing where the cobbles meet the gilded railing of the forecourt, eating an orange I had bought from a cart, and I saw her cut across the whole open square toward the one-sentry box on the south corner. A small woman, gray, in a knitted coat the color of plums, with a plastic shopping bag in one hand and the other hand already lifting, already reaching before she was anywhere near him. She did not slow at the rope. She did not slow at the sign. She put both her small hands flat against the front of the guardsman's red tunic, looked up into the shadow under his black bearskin, and said something fast, rising, 4 or 5 words I did not know in a language I could not place, and then said it again, and again, until the words came apart into the sound a person makes when the words have stopped working. I want to tell you what the soldier did, because I have thought about it every day since, and because most of you have only ever seen the photographs of these men standing like furniture, and you do not know what they are for. He did not flinch, that much you would expect, but he also did not look down at her the way the rest of us were looking, the way you look at a problem. He kept his eyes level, out over the square, jaw set, gloved hands at his sides, the rifle at his shoulder unmoving, and for one long second he simply let her hold on to him. Let an old stranger grip 2 fistfuls of the king's uniform and shake them, and did not so much as shift his weight. I thought, he is going to wait her out. I thought, in a moment a constable will come and peel her off and walk her away, and that will be the end of it, and I will go back to my orange. Then the second guardsman, the one nearer the box, took half a step and barked the line they are trained to bark. Step back from the soldier, please, clipped, loud, the voice of a man enforcing a rope, and the old woman's face came apart completely. She let go of the tunic and pressed both hands over her own mouth and made herself small, the way you make yourself small when you are somewhere you should not be and you cannot explain why you are there. The bag slipped off her wrist and a few things spilled on the cobbles, a folded paper, a coin purse, a single soft pear. That is the moment I will keep, because the first guardsman, the one she had grabbed, the one who had every reason and every order to keep his eyes forward and let the situation be handled, turned his head, just his head, down and to her, and he did not say step back. He said low, in a voice meant only to reach the 4 feet between them, "You're all right, stand easy, you're all right." She could not have understood the words, I am certain of that now. But she understood the head turning. She understood being looked at instead of looked past, and her hands came down off her mouth, and she stared up at him as though he had thrown her a line. I should tell you where I was in all this, because I was nobody. I'm a man who fixes elevators. On the second day of a holiday I had saved 4 years for, standing in a famous square with an orange and a phone I had not even thought to lift. I had never spoken to a soldier in my life. I tell you that so you understand I am not a person who steps into things. I watch them. I had watched 100 small dramas in that square already that morning. The children, the pigeons, the tour guides with their colored umbrellas held up like sails. This was the first one I could not look away from. The constable arrived then, the one I had predicted, a young one moving briskly, and he came up on the old woman's left and reached for her elbow with the easy authority of a man who moves lost people along all day. "Come on now, love, you can't be up here, come on." Gentle enough. But she felt the hand on her arm and she flinched away from it hard, into the railing, and a thin sound came out of her, and she looked back up at the guardsman, only at him, as if he were the one fixed thing in a square that had started to spin. And the guardsman spoke again, not to her this time, to the constable, eyes forward once more, voice flat and quiet and absolutely certain. "Don't pull her, she's frightened, not drunk. Give her room." The constable stopped. You could see it cost him something to stop, a young man being told his business by a sentry who was not supposed to speak at all. But he let go of her arm, and the guardsman, still without moving his boots, said to him, "She came to the post. People who are lost come to the thing that doesn't move. Let her keep it a moment. I did not know yet that those words were the whole story. I only knew that the old woman had stopped pressing into the railing, and that she was breathing in the long, ragged way of someone climbing back from the edge of panic, and that her eyes were wet and fixed on a black bearskin and a chin strap and a face that would not leave her. Then she bent, slowly, old knees, and gathered the things off the cobbles, the coin purse, the pear, and she held up the folded paper toward the guardsman with both hands, the way you would hold up something at a customs desk, and she said her 4 or 5 rising words one more time, softer, pleading. And I saw the soldier's eyes drop to the paper. Just his eyes. He could not take it. His hands were at his sides, and the rope and the law and the regiment were all between him and that paper, and he could not lift a glove to take it. So he did the only thing he could. He spoke without turning his head, out over the square, to all of us standing there with our phones and our oranges and our colored umbrellas, the dozen of us who had stopped to watch a woman fall apart at the gate. "Someone read what's on that paper," he said, "and someone find out what she speaks." For a second nobody moved. We are very good in a crowd at being a crowd, at deciding that the thing happening is someone else's to fix. I felt the old reliable urge to step back and let a person with a uniform handle it, and I watched that urge ripple through all of us, that small collective shrug. And the guardsman, who still had not moved 1 inch off his line, said it again, not louder, just with something underneath it that you do not argue with. "She is somebody's mother. Read the paper." I do not know why it was me. I was nearest, maybe, or I had eaten my orange and had a free hand, or I had been the one who could not look away. But I found myself crossing the cobbles to a frightened old woman I had never met, and crouching down to her level the way you do with a frightened animal, and putting my own hand out, palm up, for the folded paper she was holding. She gave it to me like it was the last thing she owned, and in a way, right then, it was. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. It was a hotel card, the kind they hand you at the desk so you can find your way back, with a name printed across the top in gold letters and an address in a script I could read, and below it, in pen, in a hand that was not hers, 3 words and a phone number. The hotel was the Coronet, out past the river, a good half-hour by coach from where we stood. And the 3 penned words said, "Tour Meridian Holidays, Group 9. I read it aloud. The guardsman's eyes came back forward, but I saw his shoulders settle a half-degree, the way a man settles when a shape finally has edges. "A tour group," I said to him, to her, to the small ring of people that had quietly thickened around us. "She's with a tour. They've a hotel. The Coronet." The old woman's face changed at the word Coronet. She knew it. She said it back to me, the way you say back the one familiar word in a sentence of static, and she nodded fast, eager, hopeful, and then her face fell again, because knowing the name of your hotel does you no good at all when you are standing in a square the size of a parade ground with no idea which of the 8 streets leaving it goes toward the river. "She got separated," said a voice behind me. A young woman in a university hoodie phone out had come up close. "Tour groups come through here every 20 minutes. She probably stopped to look at something and the group walked on and the guide didn't count heads. Happens all the time." She crouched beside me. "I do a bit of Portuguese. Let me try." She said something soft and careful to the old woman. The old woman blinked at her, hopeful, and answered, and the student's face fell. "That's not it. That's not anything close." The guardsman spoke without looking down. "Then we don't guess. Guessing wrong scares her worse." He let a beat pass. "Ask her nothing, show her something, the card, point at the words she knows and watch her face." It was such a simple thing, and not one of us had thought of it. The student held the hotel card up where the old woman could see it and tapped the gold name, Coronet, and the old woman nodded, "Yes, yes." Then she tapped Meridian Holidays, and the old woman's eyes lit, and she said a word twice and put her hand flat over her own heart, and we understood. Her group, her people. Then the student tapped Group 9, and the old woman held up 9 fingers and then made a little gesture. A sweeping of the hand low across the cobbles, away, gone, and her chin trembled. They had left without her. That was what the gesture meant. The coach, the guide, the umbrella, the 30 other people she had flown across the world beside, gone, away, and she did not have the words to call out to a single soul in this entire country to say so. I looked up at the guardsman then because I did not know what to do with that, and I think I expected him to have run out of road too. He was a sentry. His whole job was to not move. But his eyes had gone somewhere, out past the railing and the square and the tourists, somewhere I could not follow, and when he spoke his voice had dropped lower still. My grandmother, he said to no one to the cobbles, spent her last good year in a country where she had no words. She used to say the worst part wasn't the strangeness. It was that she couldn't say thank you. She could feel grateful and she couldn't get it out, and it built up in her like a flood with no door. He came back to himself, eyes forward. Get the hotel on that number. They'll have the tour company. The tour company will have the coach. The coach has a phone and a driver who can count to 30 and is one head short. The student was already dialing. And here is the thing I want you to understand about that square in that moment. A sentry who had not moved his boots 1 inch, who had not taken the card, who had not so much as crouched down, had taken a frightened lost woman and a crowd of useless gawkers and a half-dozen languages nobody shared, and turned it into a plan. A chain. The card to the hotel to the company to the coach. He stood at the center of it like a post, and the rest of us became the line he extended. The student got through to the hotel. I could hear the tinny voice. Yes, the coronet. Yes, they hosted meridian groups. No, they could not give out a guest's details over the phone, regulations, you understand. The student's shoulders sagged. The guardsman heard it too. Tell them, he said, that one of their guests is standing alone and frightened at the palace gate, that the guard has her, and that if they would rather she stayed alone and frightened at the palace gate, I will note the name of whoever just said no to you, and the regiment will ask the hotel that question publicly tomorrow. He said it the way he said everything, flat, unhurried, no heat in it at all. Use those words. The guard has her. The student repeated it, stumbling a little over has her. Something changed on the line. The tinny voice got faster, more cooperative. A manager came on. The coronet would call Meridian's local office at once and have the coach turned. They asked for a description of the lady. The student looked at the old woman, the plum coat, the gray hair pinned back, the plastic bag, and described her gently. And the old woman, hearing herself described in a phone to a person who suddenly seemed to be on her side, put her hand over her mouth again. But this time it was not fear coming up. It was the other thing. 20 minutes, the student said, lowering the phone. The coach is 15 minutes out on the ring road. They're turning it around. The guide's having a heart attack apparently. She's the one who lost count. 20 minutes and they'll be back at the south side where the coaches wait. 20 minutes, it does not sound long. But I watched the old woman's face when the student held up the phone and then pointed across the square toward where the coaches park, and made the universal gesture, coming back here soon. And I watched her understand that she was not abandoned, that the great gone coach was turning in the road right now and swinging its nose back toward her, and her knees went. She did not fall. The student caught one arm and I caught the other. But the strength went out of her the way it goes out of you when the danger passes and your body finally admits how afraid it was. And she turned in our hands away from us toward the guardsman. She wanted to be near the red coat. She had decided, somewhere in the part of us that decides these things below words, that the man who did not move was the safe place, and she wanted to wait out her 20 minutes in his shadow. The constable cleared his throat. She still can't stand at the post, he said, but quietly now, almost apologetic. Regulations, I'm sorry. There's a bench by the... There's no bench she'll go to, the guardsman said. That isn't this one. And then he did the thing that I think is the reason any of us still talk about that morning. He did not break his post. He did not kneel or step off his line or take her hand or do any of the soft things the photographs would have loved. He stayed exactly where he was, immaculate, eyes forward, a statue in the noon light. But he angled his head down just enough, just once, and he said to her, knowing she could not understand a word, saying it anyway because the tone was the message, "All right. You stand your watch here with me then. Right there by the rail where I can see you. We'll wait for them together. I won't move. I'm not allowed to move." A pause. "Lucky for you." She could not have caught one word, but she heard the invitation in it, and she shuffled the 2 steps to the railing nearest his post and put her hand on the cold gilded iron, and she planted herself there like she had been given a job. And I am not making this up. You can find the clip. The student filmed all of it. She squared her small shoulders and lifted her chin and stood the way he stood. An 80-year-old woman in a plum coat, doing her best impression of a KingsGuard, because the KingsGuard had told her without words that she belonged there beside him. The crowd, which had been a crowd, became something better. The student stayed crouched by the rail in case the phone rang. A retired couple produced a thermos and poured the old woman a cup of tea she did not ask for and could not refuse, and she took it in both hands and warmed them on it. A man with a guidebook flipped to the back where there were a few phrases in a dozen tongues and started reading them out one at a time, watching her face, hunting for the one that lit it. Hello, help, friend, family. He went through 5 languages with no spark and then hit the 6th, and the old woman gasped and grabbed his sleeve, and the whole little assembly leaned in. "That one," the student said, "say it again." He said the word again, a plain word, hello, in a language from a small country most of us could not have placed on a map, and the old woman answered in a flood, fast and grateful and weeping a little, and the guidebook man held up both hands, drowning, laughing, helpless, because knowing the word for hello does not let you understand the flood that follows it. But it was enough, because the student got back on the phone to the coronet and said the name of the language, and the manager said, "Marvelous, half their meridian groups this month are from there. The guide on group 9 speaks it. The guide is on the coach. The coach is 8 minutes out now. Put it on speaker when she calls." So now we knew her language, and the guardsman, who had been listening to all of it with his eyes forward and his face still, said the first thing he had said in several minutes. "Ask her her name." He let a breath go. A person waiting alone should at least be called by her name. The guidebook man worked it out with gestures, and the one word he had. The old woman pointed at her own chest and said it, 2 soft syllables, a name like a small bell, and the guidebook man repeated it and got it wrong, and she corrected him, patient, the way she must once have corrected children, and he got it right, and she beamed at him as if he had done something wonderful. "I will not give you her name. It was hers, and she gave it to a square full of strangers in the worst hour of her holiday, and it is not mine to hand around. But I leaned up toward the guardsman and I said, 'Her name is,' and I told him quietly, just him." And the guardsman, eyes forward, lips barely moving, the way they speak when they speak at all, said her name back. Got the 2 soft syllables exactly right the first time, the way he'd gotten everything right that morning. And then he said to the square, to the railing, to the noon light, "Right. We've got your name, we've got your language, we've got your coach turning in the road, and we've got tea. You are not lost anymore. You were never as lost as you felt. Quieter. Nobody ever is. It only feels that way because you can't say it." I have turned that sentence over in my hands for a long time. You were never as lost as you felt. It only feels that way because you can't say it. I think it is the truest thing I have ever heard a stranger say. The minutes went. She drank her tea. The guidebook man, emboldened, tried to teach her his name and made a hash of the exchange, and she laughed, actually laughed, a small startled sound, surprised to find she still could, and the laugh went round the little group and loosened all of us. The student kept one eye on the gate where the coaches come. The retired couple's wife dabbed her own eyes and pretended it was the wind. And then the second guardsman, the one who had barked at her first, the one who had done his duty by the rope and the regulations, did something I want to put on the record. During a lull, with his own eyes forward, he said low to the first guardsman, "Relief's at the hour. 11 minutes. You'll be off the line before her coach makes it back if it hits the bridge traffic." A small thing. A practical thing. But it meant, you will be marched off this post by the clock and the king's schedule before this is finished, and she will look for you at the railing and you will be gone. The chain you built will be one link short at the very end. The first guardsman was quiet for a moment. Then we change the relief. "You can't change the relief," said the second almost gently. "You know you can't." "No," said the first, "but the sergeant of the watch can, and he's standing in the door of the south box right now wondering why his post has acquired a grandmother." He raised his voice the smallest fraction, pitched it back over his own shoulder toward the dark of the sentry box. "Sergeant, a word when you're able." The sergeant of the watch was a broad, weathered man with 3 stripes and a face like a closed door, and he came out of the box and crossed the few feet to the post with the unhurried walk of a man who has seen everything a square can throw at a sentry and is fairly sure this is not new. He stopped, took in the railing, the old woman, the tea, the student with her phone, the guidebook man, me. He took in his guardsman, immaculate and unmoved on his line. And he said, dry as a stick, "Explain to me why my south post looks like a church coffee morning." The first guardsman explained it in 11 words. "Lost guest, no language, separated from her tour, coach inbound, 8 minutes. Whatever you want to say about these men, they are economical." The sergeant looked at the old woman a long moment. She had gone still under his gaze, sensing a new authority, the way you sense it, and she looked up at him with the open, frightened hope of a person who has learned in the last half hour that the men in this strange uniform are, against all expectation, on her side. She held up her hotel card to him too, both hands, the customs desk gesture. And the sergeant, who I am sure had a list of reasons as long as his arm to call a constable and have the area cleared, looked at that card held up in 2 old hands, and something in the closed door of his face opened the width of a hair. "Right," he said. "She can't be at the rail when the changing party marches up. That's not happening, the photographs alone." He turned his head. "But," and here he paused, and I watched a career soldier decide something. "There's the inner court by the south arch, out of the camera lines. There's a bench. If a member of the public were to feel unwell and require somewhere to sit out of the sun until her party collected her, and if a sentry coming off the line were to be the nearest trained man to see her settled, that would not be a breach of anything. That would be assistance to a member of the public in distress, which is in the standing orders, page 9, if anyone asks. And nobody will ask." He looked at his guardsman. "You're relieved at the hour either way. What you do with your own 2 feet after that is your business, provided you're presentable and you don't end up in a newspaper. Are we clear?" "Clear, Sergeant." "And son," the sergeant lowered his voice and I only caught it because I had drifted close, "you did right not to leave the line. Plenty would have. The post is the post." He glanced at the old woman. "But the post was never the point of the post. You worked that out faster than most. Carry on." He went back to his box, and I understood, watching him go, that the discipline I had spent my whole life thinking of as a kind of coldness, the not moving, the not speaking, the standing like a stone while the world swirls, was not coldness at all. It was a held shape. It was a man holding himself perfectly still so that the people who could not hold themselves still had something to hold on to. The old woman had run across an entire square to grab 2 fistfuls of that stillness, and she had been right too. We are all of us, sometimes, running across a square in a country with no words, looking for the one thing that will not move when we grab it. The student's phone rang. It was loud in the little hush, and the old woman jumped, and the student fumbled it to her ear and then yanked it away and stabbed at the screen and held it out flat between us all on speaker, and a voice came out of it speaking the old woman's language. Fast, warm, frantic, a woman's voice, the guide, the one who had lost count. I will never forget what happened to the old woman's face when she heard her own language come out of a stranger's telephone in the middle of a foreign square. It was as if someone had turned the sound back on in a film that had been playing silent. She lunged for the phone and the student let her have it, and she pressed it to the side of her head with both hands, and she talked, and talked, and the words poured out of her, that flood with no door. Finally, the door flung open, and we stood around her in a ring and could not understand one syllable and understood everything. The guide's voice on the line, between the old woman's torrents, found a moment to switch to our language for the student. Thank you, oh, we are coming, we are 5 minutes, the bridge, the traffic, tell her we are at the bridge, tell her do not move. We are coming for her, oh, she is my responsibility and I lost her. I counted and I counted wrong, tell her, please tell her, we did not leave her. We would never have left her. Tell her we turned the whole coach around the moment we knew. And the guardsman, relieved now, the changing party having come and gone in a stamp and a rattle while we were all bent over the phone, a fresh sentry standing the post and this one a half step off his line at last, his duty done by the clock, the guardsman said quietly to the student, tell her this. Tell her exactly this. And he gave her the words, and the student spoke them into the phone in the old woman's own tongue, slow and careful, the few she had cobbled together with the guidebook man's help and the guide's coaching down the line. She was not alone. Tell the guide she was not alone for 1 minute. Tell her the guard stood with her the whole time. The student said it. There was a silence down the line, and then the guide began to cry, and the old woman, hearing the guide cry, began to cry harder, and the two of them wept at each other across 5 miles of bridge traffic in a language none of the rest of us could follow. And I will tell you honestly that the retired couple's wife was not the only one pretending it was the wind by then. We moved her to the inner court. The off-duty guardsman led the way. He had taken off the worst of his post, you understand. He was still in the full red and the bearskin, still immaculate, but he was a man walking now and not a statue, and the difference in him was the difference between a closed gate and an open one. He walked at the old woman's pace, which was slow, and he carried her plastic bag, which she had at first refused to surrender and then, looking up at him, had handed over like a child handing a grown-up the heavy thing. The student came. The guidebook man came. I came. We were a small procession across the cobbles, an old woman in a plum coat and her unlikely honor guard, and the tourists we passed lowered their phones and went quiet, the way people go quiet when they sense, without being told, that they are near something that matters. The bench in the inner court was in the shade of the south arch, old stone, worn smooth. The guardsman set the bag down beside it and the old woman sat, and let out a long breath, and for the first time since she had come at us across the square she looked, not frightened, not lost, but only tired, the deep, ordinary tiredness of a person who has been very afraid and is not afraid anymore. And then she did something I did not expect. She patted the bench beside her and looked up at the guardsman and patted it again. Sit, an old woman in the inner court of a palace, inviting a KingsGuard to sit beside her on a bench, because in whatever country she came from that is what you do. You do not let a person who has helped you stand over you like a servant. You make him sit, and you find him something to eat. The guardsman looked at the bench. I watched him weigh it, and then he said gently, I can't sit, ma'am, not in this. He touched the front of his tunic, the place where her 2 hands had gripped it an hour ago, but I'll stand right here. I'm good at standing. And he set his boots and clasped his white gloves behind his back and stood at a kind of easy attention beside the seated old woman, guarding a bench in an empty court the way he had guarded the gate, and she seemed to understand that this was the most he could give and that it was, in fact, a great deal. She fished in the plastic bag. Out came the soft pear. She held it up to him in both hands, the customs desk gesture again, the only one she had, the gesture of a person offering up the one thing she has to give. The guidebook man started to explain that the guard couldn't regulations, but the guardsman bent his head, not his boots, just his head, and he looked at that pair held up in two old hands, and he did not take it because he could not, but he said, "Thank you. That's the kindest thing anyone's offered me all year, and I'm not even going to be allowed to eat it." And he smiled. I had not seen him smile. It changed his whole face, and it lasted half a second, and then it was gone, and the stone was back. But I saw it, and so did she. And she put the pair down in her lap and folded her hands over it, content. The coach came at 12 minutes past the hour. We heard it before we saw it, the diesel rumble, the air brakes, and then a colored umbrella came bobbing fast through the south arch, held high by a young woman running, and behind her a straggle of 30 tourists in sun hats. And the young woman with the umbrella saw the old woman on the bench, and dropped the umbrella on the stones, and ran the last 20 feet, and fell on her knees in front of her, and took both her hands and pressed them to her own forehead, and said the old woman's name over and over and over. The guide, the one who had lost count. She was perhaps 25, and she was sobbing in a way that 25-year-olds sob when they have made the mistake that they will measure all their other mistakes against for the rest of their lives. And the old woman, and this is the part I want you to hear. The old woman took her hands back, and used them to lift the young guide's chin, and shook her head no, and said something soft and forgiving, the kind of thing a grandmother says, and gathered the weeping girl in against her plum coat and held her, the lost one comforting the one who lost her. I have stopped trying to explain that. I just tell people it happened. And then the old woman remembered. She held the guide back at arm's length, and she turned, and she pointed at the guardsman standing his quiet watch by the bench, and she spoke, fast, urgent, pouring it out, and now, finally, after an hour, there was someone in the square who could catch every word. The guide listened. The guide turned to look at the guardsman, and then she stood and wiped her face and walked over to him, and she translated. And this is the only place in the whole morning where I am going to give you the words exactly, because the guide gave them to us exactly, and because they are the reason I am telling you any of this. She says, the guide began, and had to stop and start again. She says she has been trying for 1 hour to say thank you, and she could not, and it was the worst part. Worse than being lost. She says where she comes from, when someone saves you, you must say it. You must say it out loud, or it sits in your chest forever. She says she has a thank you in her chest the size of this whole square and no way to give it to you. And it has been, the guide pressed her hand flat to her own breastbone, mirroring something the old woman had done. It has been hurting her. So she wants me to say it for her, all of it, and she wants you to know it is hers and not mine. And then the guide said it. She said the old woman's thank you, the whole flood of it, translated and trembling. Thank you for turning your head. Thank you for telling the young one not to pull my arm. Thank you for saying my name right. Thank you for standing with me. Thank you for being the thing that did not move when everything else had walked away. And the old woman stood beside the guide, nodding at each piece of it, making sure it all came out, watching the guardsman's face to see it land. It landed. I was watching him, and it landed. He did not move, and his eyes stayed level and his jaw stayed set, but I had learned that morning to read the small country of that face, and I saw it land somewhere deep and old. When the guide finished, the guardsman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and the guide turned and gave it back to the old woman in her own tongue, sentence by sentence, so that for once the chain of words ran the whole way through. Tell her she doesn't owe me a thank you. Tell her I didn't do anything but stand still, which is the one thing I actually know how to do. A pause while that crossed over. Tell her my grandmother spent a year in a country with no words and died with a thank you stuck in her chest because nobody ever stood still long enough for her to give it. Tell her, and hear his voice. That flat, unhurried instrument did the smallest thing, caught for half a beat and went on. Tell her that by saying her thank you out loud today, she gave my grandmother's away too. Tell her she emptied 2 chests, not 1. And tell her that's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a very long time, and now we're even. The guide translated it. The old woman listened, and when it was done she did not weep. She had done her weeping. She simply looked at the guardsman for a long moment, this old woman from a small country far away who had run across a square at a wall of red and found a man behind it, and she nodded once slowly, the way you nod when an account has been balanced, and a debt that was hurting you has been paid and forgiven both at once. Then she picked up the pear from the bench, and she put it firmly into the guide's hands and pointed at the guardsman and gave an instruction. The guide laughed wetly. She says you will eat this when you are allowed. She says I am to make sure. She says she will know if you don't. Tell her, said the guardsman, that I would not dare. They got her up gently, the guide on one arm and a sun-hatted woman from the group on the other, and the whole tour gathered her into itself the way a flock gathers in a strayed bird, fussing, touching her shoulders, passing her bag from hand to hand, scolding the guide and forgiving her in the same breath. The old woman went with them, slow, toward the arch and the rumbling coach. But at the lip of the arch she stopped, and turned, and looked back across the inner court at the man in red standing beside an empty bench. She lifted her hand, not a wave. She laid it flat against the front of her own plum coat, over her heart, the same place she had laid both her hands against his tunic an hour before when she had no other way to say I am afraid, help me. Except now the gesture meant the other thing. It meant the thank you that had finally found its door. She held her hand there over her heart, and she held his eyes across the court, and she did not move it, and she did not look away, until the guide gently turned her and the arch took her and she was gone. And the guardsman, off duty, relieved, free to do as he liked with his own 2 feet, as the sergeant had put it, the guardsman brought his white-gloved hand up, slow and exact, and returned her the only salute he had. Held it at the empty arch a good 3 seconds after she had passed out of sight of it, the way you hold a salute for someone who has earned one, the way you hold it at a graveside or a flag. Then he brought it down and squared his shoulders, and let out a breath that fogged faintly in the shade of the old stone, and became a man again instead of a monument. The crowd had thinned. The student was wiping her phone screen on her sleeve, having filmed the whole thing without once thinking to post it. She told me later she nearly deleted it, that it felt like something you shouldn't sell. The guidebook man was repeating the word for hello under his breath so he wouldn't lose it. The retired couple had gone, their thermos empty. And the guardsman picked up his bearskin's chin strap that the heat had loosened, set it right, checked the line of his tunic where 2 small hands had gripped it, and walked back toward the south box to make himself once more into the thing the square expected, silent, still, eyes forward. A wall of red for the next lost soul who came at it not knowing it was a man. I went up to him before he reached the box. I don't know what I meant to say. I am not a man who steps into things, I told you that. But I had stepped into this one an hour ago with my hand out for a folded paper, and I could not quite step back out of it without a word. So I said the only true thing I had. I said, I came here on a holiday I saved 4 years for. I thought the best thing I'd see was the changing of the guard. He looked at me, eyes level, that small country of a face giving nothing and everything. You did see the changing of the guard, he said, just not the one in the brochure. And then he went and stood his post, and within a minute he was a statue again, exactly as the photographs show him, exactly as 10,000 tourists would film him that week with no idea, none at all, what that stillness is for. I have thought about it every day since. People see these men and they see discipline, and they think discipline is a wall, a thing that keeps the world out, that lets nothing in or through. I thought that too with my orange on the 2nd day of my holiday. But I watched a wall of red turn its head for a frightened old woman who could not say a single word he could understand, and I learned the truth of it. The discipline is not a wall. The discipline is a held shape. It is a man making himself into something that will not move, will not flinch, will not walk away with the coach, so that when somebody comes across the whole wide square with the last of what they have, far from home and out of words, There is one fixed thing left in the world for them to reach. She found hers at a palace gate, on the worst morning of her holiday, in a country with no words for her grief or her gratitude. And the fixed thing turned its head and learned her name and stood with her until her people came back, and then saluted her, and emptied 2 chests at once, and went back to standing still. That is what the stillness is for. I will never look at one of those red coats the same way again, and neither, I think, will you.